Holly's Guide to Watercolour. First thing to do is choose your paper. I like to use a cold press because it's got a more grainy texture and it's more giving if I use too much water. Here is an example of the texture. Step 2 is to stretch the watercolour paper. When you're using watercolour, the water can make the paper buckle and make it crinkle, and you don't want this. So in order to prevent this, you soak it in a bath or sink of water. It doesn't matter the temperature. If it doesn't fit, you can always fold it, but make sure it doesn't create a fold. While the paper's soaking, I'm going to get my waterproof board ready and my tape measured out to size. As you can see, you just lay it up against the side of the board to check the length. All you need is brown tape, which you can get from any craft store. And you pull it out and check. It doesn't matter if the end is messy, because you're just using it to stick on and it won't be visible when you're finished it. Now I'm ready for my paper to be laid central on my board. I'm just shaking off any drips, as you want to have minimum water on your board, therefore it will dry quicker. I lay it centrally so I have a border around the paper, as I need some room for my tape to go. You want to choose a board that is bigger than your paper, as your paper will stretch and you need something for the brown paper to hold on to. Now that the paper has been placed on our board, we can put the tape on. You simply just dunk it in a bowl of water till it's completely wet. Make sure you get the slippery side face down, otherwise the tape won't work. And place it on as shown. As you can see, the paper and tape have dried completely. Now when removing the tape, it is best to use a craft knife or a sharp knife or scissors. As you can see, some of the tape is peeling off already and it is easy to remove. However, if it gets stuck and you're at risk of tearing your paper, it is alright to cut to the edges and use the other side because no one will see through. I'm simply going to cut it out with a craft knife. You just run it along. And a final trim to remove the tape. The price of watercolour paint varies depending on the amount of pigment. I would avoid cheap paints and go with something like the Winsor & Newton Artist Quality paints, shown here. Most often I use pans, which are these little blocks. However, you can also use larger tube format in colours that you use most often, such as black or white. If you're going to do a lot of watercolour, it's a good idea to invest in some good quality sable brushes. Use a medium wash 4B pencil to sketch before you draw. If you've drawn a line you don't want, you can always use a putty rubber to rub it out. I recommend using a putty rubber as it doesn't create a barrier if you want to paint over. However, advice given to me is that pencil marks can be the beauty about a painting, so don't necessarily get rid of them. You can see how we've used a sketch to overlay with watercolour to create our cherry blossom tree. Don't be afraid to test and experiment with the colours and techniques you're going to use in your picture. Watercolour paint dries very fast, so test a colour on a scrap of paper or on the edge of your painting before using it. That way you'll know whether it's the right tone you're after. Be careful not to overload your brush with water, as this can turn the paint that's dried back into a liquid. Therefore, it can run into other colours mixed with it and ruin your picture. You can also use this method to your advantage if you want to soften up a line, or you want to lift the paint off the paper to fix a mistake, lighten a colour by removing some of it, or even mix it with a new paint. Though you need to be careful not to scrub at the paper too much, as this can damage the surface. With watercolour paint, a colour will always look more intense when it is wet. A colour will always be lighter and paler when dry. It's something you get a feel for through practice and experience. If your paintings look insipid, make the colours more intense by using more paint and less water. Or, alternatively, painting another layer of colour over the first. Be careful not to overload your brush with water, as this can turn the paint that's dried back into a liquid. Therefore, it can run into other colours mixed with it and ruin your picture. You can also use this method to your advantage if you want to soften up a line, or you want to lift the paint off the paper to fix a mistake, lighten a colour by removing some of it, or even mix it with a new paint. Though you need to be careful not to scrub at the paper too much, as this can damage the surface. We can combine watercolour with other artist materials, such as this black pen, which is used in the Roald Dahl illustrations. I hope you've enjoyed these top tips on watercolour. Remember to have fun and experiment. Feel free to share this YouTube video with others who want to learn more about watercolour. Goodbye and good luck.